Nintendo is selling fewer Switch 2 consoles and making more money than before. And on September 1st, the same console costs you $50 more. That should not fit in your head right away. The box sold 3.82 million units from April through June, down 34.4% on the year before. And in that same quarter, Nintendo's operating profit rose 150%. So I had to read the earnings twice because the unit story looked like weakness and the money story looked like strength. Then a Walmart kiosk turned up with a sign warning shoppers about the rise. That is what made the whole thing click for me because Nintendo is putting up the price of the box even while the box is no longer where the real profit seems to live. Nintendo has had a simple rule for a long time. It tries to avoid selling each game machine at a loss. That sounds obvious until you remember that console makers can be tempted to do the opposite. Sell the box cheap, get it into houses, and make the money later when people buy games. But Nintendo has usually been much more careful than that because it wants the machine cheap enough to spread while still not burning cash on every unit it ships. And the one time Nintendo broke that kind of rule, the scar was huge. In 2011, it cut the 3DS from $249 to $169. That cut put the machine below cost, and over the 9 months that followed, Nintendo lost about $630 million. Satoru Iwata then cut his own pay in half, and the directors under him took cuts too. So when Nintendo looks at a new machine and a price that might not cover the cost, this is not some small theory in a slide deck. It has a memory attached to it. The strange thing is that Nintendo was trying very hard to hold the Switch 2 at $449.99. In April of 2025, it delayed American pre-orders because it said it needed to weigh the possible impact of tariffs. Tariffs are import taxes, and the numbers were not small, with China up at 145%. But Nintendo still opened pre-orders that same month at the same price, and it put up some add-on prices instead. So the launch price held, and the console shipped that June. There was one outside guess from Hideki Yasuda at Toyo Securities that the parts cost about $400 against that launch price. I would not hang a conclusion on that because Nintendo has never published the build cost or the hardware margin for a Switch 2. But even as a rough outside guess, it shows how little room there may have been if costs started moving the wrong way, and then costs did move the wrong way. In May, Nintendo said the American price would go to $499.99. Canada and Europe went up too, and Japan had already gone up in the spring. Nintendo said the cause was expected to run over the medium to long term, which is a very dry way of saying, we do not think this goes away soon. Shuntaro Furukawa, Nintendo's president, was unusually plain about the pain. He said, "We sincerely apologize to our customers for the considerable inconvenience and trouble this will cause." He also said Nintendo had wanted to put wide adoption first, meaning it wanted as many people as possible to buy the machine, but that it was hard to carry rising costs over a long stretch. And then, he said the line that matters most. The new price does not cover all the cost increases. Look, I don't get how you hear that and still read the rise as an easy profit grab. Nintendo is charging $50 more, and its own president is saying that $50 still does not cover it. He also said the profit on the hardware would suffer a lot if Nintendo kept the old price, and he admitted the higher price raises the bar for getting in, which is the polite way of saying some people will think twice. The cost shock here seems to be memory chips, plus other parts, plus tariffs, all in one pile. Furukawa said, Nintendo worked out the impact of the rise in memory and other part prices, then added the impact of tariffs on cost of goods sold, and came up with about 100 billion yen. That is one combined number for 1 year, and he would not split it apart. Nintendo said, "We do not discuss any details concerning how we calculate the amount of impact." So anyone who turns that figure into a clean memory-only bill is going past what Nintendo actually said. A reporter at the CBC divided it by Nintendo's full-year console plan and got roughly $40 a box. That is the reporter's math, not Nintendo's own per-box figure. Still, it gives you a feel for the size of the hit, and you can see why $50 at the shelf may still not make the company whole. But the deeper problem is that the cost pressure does not look short. TrendForce reports said AI data centers were taking about 70% of the world's memory output, and that is the thing I walked into this story not expecting at all. This is not only about game consoles. Every phone, laptop, car, and data center is bidding for chips out of the same warehouse, and the data centers showed up with very deep pockets. Memory industry sales rose 81% in a single quarter early this year. Contract prices for computer memory roughly doubled in that same quarter, the steepest rise on record. And LPDDR5X, the kind of memory a Switch 2 runs on, with 12 gigabytes of it in the system, went up by about the same. The forecasts after that were still ugly, and no steady point was in sight. So when Furukawa said Nintendo could have looked at other options if the cost rise were short, that sentence had a lot under it. Nintendo is basically trying to hold a family price in a market where the core chip is being bid up by AI data centers. And I had to check that twice because the pressure on a Nintendo box is coming from a market that does not look like games at all. That is a brutal place to sell a family game machine. Sony and Microsoft have already been moving prices too. In the spring, Sony put the PlayStation 5 up by $100 or more across its models. Microsoft moved on the 1st of August and it said console, storage, and memory prices had gone up by more than 2.5 times. So Nintendo is not alone in facing the chip problem, but Nintendo's pain is different because its whole model depends on the box being easy to buy. A cheap Nintendo machine is basically the delivery van for the games. The company wants that van in as many homes as possible because the real money can come later through game and digital sales. That is why the latest quarter looked so odd at first. Hardware units fell by a third and total net sales fell 9.5%. But operating profit rose to 142 billion yen and net profit climbed as well. A one-off helped the quarter look better. Nintendo recorded about $300 million as a cut to cost of sales, tied to a refund of American tariffs it had already booked before, and it had absorbed those tariffs itself instead of pricing them in at the time. So that refund flatters the quarter and you should keep that in mind. But even with that caution, the shape of the business is hard to miss. In the same 3 months, Switch 2 software sold 9.5 million copies. Across its life so far, the machine has sold 58 million games on 23 million consoles. Digital sales were up 90% on the year before, and downloads are now well over half of everything Nintendo sells in software. And that is where the quarter stops looking like a fluke and starts looking like the business model. What I keep landing on is that the box still matters a lot, just not in the clean way people expect. Nintendo can sell fewer boxes in a quarter and still make far more profit if the software, the digital mix, and the cost items line up. The box matters because it gets the games into the house. The box does not need to be the main profit pool, but that creates the trap. Nintendo still wants the Switch 2 cheap enough to spread, and it still has an old rule about not losing money on each machine, and now memory prices and tariffs are pushing against both sides of that rule. If $50 extra does not cover the cost rise, then the leftover hit lands on Nintendo's hardware line. That is the very thing the old rule was meant to protect. So the rise is not just Nintendo making the console dearer. It is Nintendo trying to keep the console from becoming a money leak while the company still needs that console to spread. I kept thinking about the coffee shop version of this. Imagine a shop hands you a mug for exactly what the mug costed, because what it is really after is 10 years of your coffee money. If the mug suddenly costs a lot more to make, the shop has a bad choice. Put the mug price up and scare off some people, or hold it down and bleed cash before anyone orders a coffee. Nintendo's mug is the Switch 2, and the coffee is games, add-ons, downloads, and everything that comes after the machine is in your living room. That is also why the full year guidance matters. After this odd quarter, Nintendo left its full year numbers alone. It's still guided for the same net sales, the same operating profit, and in the same console plan it gave investors in the spring. So Nintendo is telling investors, in effect, that the year can still work. Look, I cannot tell from what they published exactly how much pain sits inside each box. I am not saying that means the rise will be painless, because Nintendo itself said the higher price raises the bar for getting in. And there is no measured data yet showing whether people are rushing to buy before September or whether there is a real backlash. Those may happen or they may not. What I can say is that we do not have those numbers. There is also no public Switch 2 build cost from Nintendo, so we cannot say for sure whether the box is above or below water today. The only firm thing we have is Nintendo's own statement that the old pricing would hurt hardware profit a lot, and that the new price still does not cover all the cost increases. That is already enough. It shows Nintendo stuck between the old console dream and the new chip market. The old dream is pretty simple. Sell a box people can afford, keep the price friendly, and make your money as people buy games for years. The new chip market is harsher because AI data centers, phones, computers, cars, and consoles all pull on the same memory supply. And if the people building data centers can pay more, the family game box does not get special treatment. That is why this rise feels bigger than $50. It is a sign that the cost of AI hardware is leaking into ordinary gadgets in ways people notice at the till. Nintendo is not saying that in those words, and I do not want to push it further than the filing's support. But when memory output is being eaten up by data centers, and console makers are putting prices up, and Microsoft is warning that memory may double again, the link is hard to ignore. So the weird quarter now makes more sense to me. Nintendo shifted fewer Switch 2 boxes, made far more operating profit, and still decided the box had to get dearer. That sounds wrong until you see that the box is both less important for profit and very important for access. Nintendo can make money from games after the box is sold, but it cannot get those game sales from people who never buy the box. That is the balance Furukawa is trying to protect. Hold the price too low, and the hardware line gets hurt. Put it up too much, and the door into the Nintendo world gets heavier. The $500 Switch 2 is what happens when that balance gets squeezed. Honestly, the part that still feels strange is that Nintendo can look healthier on paper while the product in the shop gets harder to buy. The most honest way I can put it is this: Nintendo did not put the price up because the Switch 2 stopped mattering. Nintendo put the price up because the Switch 2 matters so much that the company cannot afford to let the box itself break the business. Nintendo files again in November, and that is the report that tells us whether the chip bill got worse or finally started to ease. We'll be reading it either way. Subscribe and you will get that number the week it lands.